Welcome to Journeys in Podcasting. We have an early afternoon edition. I'm Chris Davis. I help manage this podcast. I'm here in Bogota, Colombia, and we have John Zola with us today. We'll be talking about Socratic Circles. Joe, you want to throw in who you are?
Joe Koss. I'm a social studies teacher and kind of a provocateur at my school here in Uruguay, at the Uruguayan American School. Nice to be with you guys.
And John, can you tell us how you got here? Who are you, and why are you going to be talking about Socratic Circles today?
So I'm John Zola. I'm a retired social studies teacher, originally from Wisconsin, and ended up in Boulder, Colorado about 35, 36 years ago. And over the length of my career, always in the classroom, I encountered Socratic seminars accidentally in the late 1980s. At a workshop, and somebody who had learned how to do Socratic seminars was an educational consultant and didn't have a classroom, and she asked if she could borrow my students, and as any good teacher says, the response is how often and how many. And so she came in for a couple of periods every other week, and we coached each other, and I observed, and then we took turns doing them. And so I've been doing seminars since the late 1980s in social studies classrooms, primarily high school and middle school, and for the last probably 15 or 20 years have been doing workshops on a number of things, Socratic seminars being one of them. And my workshops, though my experiences in secondary, my workshops have almost been predominantly middle school and elementary school teachers. And so I've worked with K-12 teachers on Socratic seminars, and I've got a connection to international schools, both through some friends. I just recently did some substitute teaching there and have worked with some of the regional organizations, NISA and AAAS and I believe, and the Tri Association, some others. So I think that's what brings me here.
Great. Well, let's delve into what Socratic Circles are all about. I want to start with you have in your documentation some considerations to think about, and one of the things is the actual opening of the circle, of how to get the first question started. And you have a great descriptor here, which is kind of cryptic. It says they should invite thinking, but don't have to be terrible thoughtful. And my question here is what is the strategy there? Is it so kids can frame their own thought? Are you using kind of a blink strategy where kids have to kind of take everything that they kind of want to say and get a macro lens on it before they delve into the kind of the more micro sequential kind of thinking?
Right. So I think that the notion that I finally came up with opening questions, and this is really about how you start a seminar for me. And if the goal of a seminar, sort of work backwards, if the goal of a seminar is to have an authentic conversation about the issues, the ideas, the values that are in a text, and if we really believe that it's the student's work, not my work, then I think you go at the opening question differently than you go at a question that you would have in a discussion where you have a goal for the meaning or the content that's going to come out of it. And I kind of had this insight, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, because I was frustrated by coming up with opening questions. I always thought there was like this perfect opening question. And what I've come to realize is that if we think about it as the most thought-provoking question, a question like, when comparing gender roles in this particular story versus the narrative arc of that, what happens is that some students, as soon as you begin, more than 3 or 4 words in, some kids sort of, as it were, sit back and go, that's probably an interesting question, but I don't do those questions. It's like, those are too complicated for me. A bunch of other kids go, gender. Oh, dang, gender is those males, females. And by the time they've figured out what gender is, they've lost the question anyway, but they're trying to figure things out. Other kids are saying, just pay attention to Chris. Chris usually answers something. Chris says something that's good. Follow Chris's lead. And so what I want instead is a question that's as invitational and as non-threatening as possible. And so my notion of an opening question is that it's just a piece of bait to throw out there. And if it's a good opening question, there's a lot of sort of yes, no, maybe, I'm not sure. And I can then say, so take us to a piece of the text. Or Chris, you said yes, and Joe, you said no. What are each of you thinking? So I want it to be as invitational as possible. So I think one of the comments in those materials is that in contrast to an essential question that drives a whole unit of study or something, this is an inessential question. It's good only for, it's got a very short shelf life. I have no need to go back to the question as long as it gets something started. And I think it's counterintuitive to how we have been taught to lead discussions. We either ask a sort of low-level fact recall question that doesn't generate discussion, or we think we have to ask some hugely synthetic evaluative question that leaves kids in the dust, and it's like, I don't know, they throw their hands up. Or 3 kids answer and the other 27 kids don't. So I want every kid to feel that they've got some thought about that particular question. I'll give you an example. A great elementary school this time of year, first Socratic seminar is on either like the school code, which usually is some acronym of pride, and P for punctuality and R for respect and E for equality and those sorts of things, or 4 or 5 classroom rules. You give kids that text, and the opening question is as simple as, which of these is the most important, or which is the hardest? And every kid's got a notion of that. It's very easy for them, and you can go into lots of different directions and go into a great deal of depth, but you start with just this little sort of piece of bait that's thrown into the water.
You're making me think of my first experience at a small liberal arts college, where you walk into these classes and there's only like 8 people, and there's just discussion, and it's like what you bring to the table as opposed to the normal usual prompting, and this is what you need to know, and you're going to be thought of this way. It's kind of along the same lines, and I think the answer might be very much the same, but you also mentioned about this idea about writing the title or rewriting the title of the text, or taking the segment of text and creating the title for it. Is this a kind of synthesis? I see what the mind might be doing in this moment, and again, it's that kind of macro-micro idea of powers of 10, zooming out to kind of grab a concept, name it, and then zooming in to go into the details. Is that where you're going with that?
Actually, I would love for it to have been that thoughtful. This was, remember, I just said that it was only a 5 or 6 years ago that I sort of figured out opening questions, and so this was known as the title dodge, and I learned it from, I'm not sure who I learned it from, but when I couldn't come up with an opening question because I was trying to come up with this perfect, essential question of some sort, this always successful thing was to say, okay, great, come up with a new title for this, on the assumption that a title should tell you something about the text and make you want to read the text, but it's something very brief. And so I would have everybody come up with a title and then go around the room and write each of them on the board, and invariably somebody would suggest a title where kids in the class would go, huh? What? Huh? And I'd finish going around the room, get all the titles, and then I'd go back and say, so why'd you react to that particular title so strongly? And that's, or ask which is the best title for this, and that's what got the conversation started. In retrospect, I think it does everything that you've described, but that wasn't my initial intent. It was really sort of, oh my God, I got to do a seminar next period, and I don't know what I'm going to ask for an opening question. I'll have them come up with a title for it. But I think it's a great thing. It also is a great ELL strategy, because when you do the go around and you do the whip around, one of the things we know is that if a kid hears their voice once, they're more likely to put their voice in the circle a second time. And it's kind of a non-threatening way to do it. And actually, if I knew that I was going to do this, I might even alert the ELL support teacher so that the kids got a chance to do some thinking, vocabulary perhaps, or do some thinking about what they might come up with for a title, so that they're prepared for that. So it sort of it serves a couple of purposes. It just sort of happened more organically rather than intentionally.
Well, no, and I'm hearing you repeat a couple of times this idea of lowering the threshold, of making it very non-threatening to enter, which is a major factor in these classrooms, especially like 4th, 5th grade, where I just read in the John Hopkins report recently that sometimes there's 11 grade levels of reading differences within one class that you could have. That drastic of a difference. So you have to get all kids engaged. Making sure that everyone can enter. So I want your ideas on another thing, and that's. Oh, sorry, Joe. You want to cut it?
Well, I was just gonna throw in. I I've actually been thinking a lot about getting my kids to write blog posts for audience instead of for assignments.
Mhm.
And this idea of structuring titles really falls in very nicely into this idea of digital citizenship. And how can we get kids to be creating things that are, for consumption outside of themselves? And I think rewording a title for a text is a great entry point into, okay, now how do you create a blog post title that people are going to want to click? That's interesting. And that's not just my project on design, right? Instead of creating something that's creative,
Right.
and that's for an audience. I was just kind of making that connection while you were talking there.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a real neat connection.
So you also mentioned this idea of sometimes reading a piece of text, if it's poetry, having a kid read it. And I want to go try to connect that to something I did with junior grade books a lot, of trying to tweak their format to make it a little bit more friendly for the second language learner. And that is, the kids would work as part of their study of the text. They would also create monologues of characters, and they could pick and choose whatever text they wanted, patch different dialogues together, or kind of make up their own if they wanted to. And they would practice that all week. So by the end of the week, you get this incredibly dramatic read, and the kids would actually look forward to standing up and giving their oral presentation. But it would also give us incredible insight into like why they use their tone of voice, what gestures they used, all the communication factors that went into it, and this kind of what we call the redundant abundant, where they take one text and they just keep working through it until they find the deeper emotions or analysis or whatever they're trying to get at there. Do you use that a lot? I know you mentioned that as one of the things you want to think about, but that idea of practicing, perfecting an oral performance for the actual Socratic Circle.
No, I have to tell you that I think what you described is really interesting. One of the things, and I think I want to go. Give me a moment here, because I'm gonna go someplace. So the title of this blog or podcast and stuff is Socratic Circles, and I think in a preliminary conversation you and I had, I sort of know Socratic Circles as a book and as a very specific format for doing Socratic seminars, primarily for doing Socratic seminars in classrooms where there's a pretty large number of students. And so it was a way to sort of divide the group in half, but have everybody do meaningful activities, and sort of do 2 half-group seminars, but have everybody involved. And I think sort of more broadly of Socratic seminars, which is a whole class activity, generally speaking. And when I learned to do them, I had classes of 32 and 34 kids. So I think of it as a big setting, and I think of there being a lot of traffic copying that goes on. I don't think that's an optimum number, but I learned it as a whole group activity. So number one, I think of a Socratic seminar as that thing, and then there are things like Socratic Circles, even the things with the Twitter back channels and stuff that I think are all sorts of different ways of engaging kids in Socratic conversations, and that help to deal with class size pressures or audience attention issues or overlaying social media. There's a whole bunch of different goals. And I say all that because while I think what you described is really cool and has its place, a lot of what I've tried to do in my workshops and in working with teachers is to try to both have seminars carry the water that they need to carry, but not carry so much that they become something else. And so I think there's a whole raft of things that you can do with kids to get them to a literal understanding of the text that's in service of having a conversation at a moment in time about the ideas, the issues, the meanings that can be derived from the text. And I think depending on the text, you want to spend more time, or you can spend less time on doing those sorts of literal understandings so that everybody knows. So I do a lot with Supreme Court cases. And one of the things I realized is that I could use the seminar to sort of collectively figure out what was the history of the case and who won it on appeal and why, and who ultimately, won it in the Supreme Court. And I came to realize that that wasn't the interesting work. The interesting work is, was it the right decision, or who's got the best rationale for the decisions that were made by the court? So I spend most of my front-loading time doing just plain old literal stuff. What was the issue? What happened? Where was it in previous courts? And then finally, how did the Supreme Court rule, so that we know this was the ruling and we don't have to sort of hassle out in that seminar environment, which is a limited amount of time and space in a curriculum, those things that are really, we can stipulate and are factual things or literal understandings, so that then we can say, so which of the justices do you think had the most powerful argument? And so as my thought about the activity you described is that it's an incredible way to help kids get a literal understanding of the text. Does it serve the seminar? Probably it does. Most teachers, I think, often don't have the time in the curriculum to spend that much time to work with one particular text, given all of the demands that we have given all the demands that we have. We've got infinite things to do in the classroom and exceedingly finite amounts of time in which to do those. So that's some of the thinking that I do.
Yeah, it seems like it's just a giant struggle of opportunity cost of time. What do you want to put into each activity? We recently had a podcast on theater of the oppressed, and I was immediately like, oh my God, these techniques are perfect for putting into readers' theater.
Yeah.
But then that changes the branding of what you're really doing, because theater of the oppressed would specifically be addressing an oppressive power situation.
That's right.
Whereas delving into a character's feelings might not be that thing, although you can adopt some of those techniques. So I kind of see it as like what Project Zero does with their thinking moves, that you can take segments and parts of Socratic dialogue, and the Socratic method is always there present, but you're not necessarily doing the branding of the Socratic circle.
And actually, let me just specifically to something you asked on reading the poetry. I have kids read the poetry aloud for two reasons. One is I think that poetry is an auditory means of expression. I mean, poetry is meant to be read aloud, and so I think it does justice to the modality. I think, and I want kids to appreciate that poetry read aloud is different than poetry read inside of your head. The other was, and it goes back to the making a title thing, is that a lot of times what happens is when you have kids read it, and it might be a kid reads the whole poem or you go around stanza by stanza, is that somebody will say, I didn't read it like that, and you say, really, tell me more, and your seminar starts without even having, going to an opening question. And so there's some practical reasons why I have them do that as well. And one other thing, and then I won't shut up because that's not why I'm here. I think your point is really, really important, and I stress this with teachers, that not every teacher in every setting can do Socratic seminars or do them as regularly as they want to, but you can learn a lot from a Socratic seminar training about being more Socratic, and just in all of your interactions with kids being more Socratic, which is really saying, I trust you to come up with valid interpretations, and I'm going to push you to support those interpretations. And how do you know that? And asking sort of the push questions rather than always sort of having the third level Bloom's taxonomy question in your back pocket. It's really helping kids move forward with their own discussions.
Yeah, when I first started playing around, I keep referring to junior grade books just because that's where I have the most experience with these kind of things. But when we first went into it, we would alternate. We'd do like 4 weeks of regular reading study, and then we would take a week and do a junior grade book study. And when we went out of that back to the regular book study, we would get into discussion moments, and I could tell kids were just waiting and wanting to go deeper and deeper. You could feel the passover. It's like that's what kids want out of their learning experience.
Totally.
We just have them on these tracks running so fast that they're getting the 2-inch, the mile-wide, 2-inch deep curriculum.
That's right.
Let's talk about teacher role, because I think this is a pretty critical issue. Yeah. And let me keep going back to junior grade books, but I'm not plugging them, by the way. I just happen to really like the program. My struggle when I first did junior grade books was like I felt like I had to do it several times before it really became a part of the classroom culture. And I felt like in the beginning I was a very important part of the circle, that I had to be prompting kids and I had to be there as part of modeling this Socratic method. of what is that next build on question, and where do we take that idea and the three ideas that were mentioned before it and push those forward into the new synthesis or the new question or whatever. And then by the end of the year, I was just holding a camera. I mean, I would start, they would introduce themselves, and basically in the good ones they would talk for 20 minutes and I wouldn't say a thing. Can you talk about teacher role in the Socratic Circle?
Yeah. I think everybody's idiosyncratic about these things. My take on it is that in some ways they pay me the big money to help make what could be a good discussion that kids could do on their own a better discussion, because I'm there. As I joke with my secondary students when they say, so what do you think? What do you think? It's like, I already have a high school diploma. It's like, it's your turn to get one. I did this work a while ago. Now it's your turn. And so my role as the leader is there to help do some of the things that you described, is to say, so I heard Joe say this and I heard Chris say that. Are they saying the same thing, or are they saying different things? Or where can you find things in the text that help us understand the shades of difference or the nuance between those things? I don't think those are things that kids will necessarily do on their own, even though they may be having a positive discussion and it's moving forward and they're on task and they're on topic. And so it's my job as a leader, primarily and foremost, to set aside my content agenda. That the work they're doing is the work they're doing. They're not trying to come up with my interpretation. And that comes down to how I present my body language. And in the workshops that I do, I spend a lot of time reminding people about the power of the bobblehead. That as well, we're as teachers, oh, Chris, great. Kids are kids, and as kids get past about third grade, they know who gets the positive bobbleheads and who gets the quizzical, what did they just say, looks. And so if it's really their conversation as a leader, we want to make sure that we're neutral and that we're saying, so I'm hearing you say this, what about that? And that they're really coming up with their interpretations. And it's why seminars are so important that we do, and whether it's a great books format, if it's a Socratic seminar format, Socratic Circles, any of those, is that what we're helping kids do is struggle with ambiguous texts and to make meaning of ambiguous texts. What life presents us is ambiguous texts. We don't go out into the world and when we face a problem say, man, I don't know if I like Obamacare or not. I got to get me a worksheet that's going to help me understand Obamacare. We don't do that. We have to struggle in conversation with one another. And so what the question of what makes for effective healthcare in a democracy is a Socratic text. What are the qualities of a good life mate is a Socratic question. What makes me happy is a Socratic question. And if we don't give kids the opportunity to struggle and make their own meanings and bounce their ideas off of one another, I think we're not preparing them for the real questions that they're going to face in the world. And so I want to make sure that the conversations, I'm pushing them in the directions where they can hone those skills. Now, you're totally right. When kids get good at doing this stuff, they can do it. I think with a leader who lets go of their own agenda, who sort of plays traffic cop more than anything else and periodically pushes kids a little bit further, I think you can just go a little bit deeper into the conversation, and the kids, it's better for them. So as a leader, I'm quasi-activist. I certainly have a voice during it. But it's not my opinions that are coming in. They're all sort of, how do you know that? How do these ideas relate to one another? Where is it in the text? Let's pause for a second and all read that section and see, are we really interpreting it the way we think we are, or is there some other, is Kyle's interpretation a more accurate one? So it's that sort of a role that I think we play.
Yeah, if I just want to jump in here for a second, and I don't think it's necessarily an either or choice, right? Like, I think some situations will lend itself to one role for the teacher, and others will lend itself to the other role. I can remember, in a theory of knowledge class, we were all very comfortable with each other. It was our second semester. They knew me as the teacher who would provoke them, and we have a little stuffed animal that I usually use to signal who's got the talking point. And I put the opening on the board. I threw the stuffed animal to the first person, and then I went to the back of the room and I sat in the beanbag. Yeah. They all turned around and looked at me. but it was one of the best conversations or discussions that we had. I removed myself because of the situation, and I think that's important to keep in mind as teachers too, that some situations might lend itself to different interpretations.
Right. And I think, and Joe, I think you raise a really important thing about the role of the leader, that one of the things that we do a lot in a lot of our more traditional discussions, if you sort of make a distinction between kind of traditional discussions and Socratic seminars, is that we act as the provocateur or as the devil's advocate and things. One of the things I try to not do in seminars is to play devil's advocate. I want the kids to play devil's advocate, number one, and number two, we usually play devil's advocate in order to get kids supporting this viewpoint versus that viewpoint and that. And in a seminar, what I want is kids not sort of taking sides. It's like, so tell me, why would you believe the interpretation that Joe just presented? Let's all go back to the text and find evidence to support Joe. Let's take his opinion seriously, or his perspective seriously. We don't have to agree with it, but let's take it seriously. And I think seminars are about some different work, and I think one of the things that probably happened in that setting was that they didn't need to be provoked. They had stuff to say, and they went ahead with their work, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. Interestingly, I think sometimes teachers are afraid to interject themselves, and this goes back to some of Diana Hass's research regarding teacher disclosure. And
right.
How comfortable are teachers disclosing their viewpoints on things? Should they be, the neutral observer? Should they only be the devil's advocate, or should they actually offer their own true opinions on the text? And I think those lines are sometimes hard for teachers to find solid, firm footing on. And so, like, okay, I just have to remove myself, which isn't always the case.
That's right, and in some ways that's sort of like, it still begs the question, and I think part of again, we have to think about sort of whose work is it and what is the work that we're about. And if the work, and I believe that the work of a Socratic seminar, while they're always based on some content, the work of a Socratic seminar is not content based, it's process based. It's about learning the skills of analysis and discussion and comparison and close reading and all those sorts of things. And it's the kids' job to do that. And in a lot of discussions, I will be much more aggressive in terms of my pushing, from a devil's advocate perspective, perhaps, there's a viewpoint that's not being represented. And I tend to be someone who didn't share my own opinions, but would push a variety of opinions. In a Socratic seminar, I'm doing different work at that point. I really want to help kids explore the different perspectives without it becoming a debate, which is often what happens when we get into those individual perspectives.
Right, or those controversial issues.
Yeah. And to that point, I've only done one seminar in 25 years related to abortion. It's just, there are better ways, there are better methods to deal with that as a topic. The one time I did is it was a Supreme Court case, and we did the cases leading up to and ultimately Roe versus Wade as Supreme Court cases. And then we were doing our Supreme Court work, which was about analyzing arguments and stuff. It wasn't that abortion wasn't the topic, it's that we were doing different work than that. It wasn't advocacy work on behalf of that. It was analyzing judicial reasoning and stuff like that.
As I'm listening to you, well, are you guys getting an echo? I'm getting a ton over here. No?
I'm not, but I get it a little bit from you.
Okay. I'll push on. What I'm thinking more is like at deeper levels, how this has always been a part of learning. If you go back to the Socratic method, the original, Socrates and the idea of the dialectic, and then how that's manifested itself through the ages. I know I came through looking at Master Singer's work, the descriptions of the yeshiva, and the debates within the Talmud. Where does it root for you? Where would you point history to comes from?
There was a lot of echo there. It's funny, we were just talking about this. The guy that I was writing with has been reading these books on communication and sort of the history of communication. And I always joke that Socrates, he gets credit for Socratic seminars because Socratic seminars are about asking questions, right? But in reality, if you read any of the Socratic dialogues, he was a really crappy Socratic seminar leader. Almost everything was phrased, if I were to do this and were to do that, is it not so that this would happen? And Chris says, it is so, Socrates. And then would it not be so that if this, this, and this, that would happen? So it is, Socrates. So it was really about everything Socrates had to say, nothing about the meaning making of the people with whom he was interacting. I actually think that this is very different. I think that the arc of educational history has been one of meaning being distributed from higher to lower, and that the conversations were really mostly about, until I think you get to sort of doctoral situations. And Deborah Meyer, who was the founder of Central Park East Secondary School, is one of the very early coalition of essential schools. Her stuff is really good. When we were starting a school that in Boulder, a non-traditional school in which seminars played a really central role, we read an article of hers. She had originally begun as a kindergarten teacher, and her article, and you can find it online, it's a chapter of a book, is what kindergarten has to say to high school teachers. And her premise, in essence, is that the only time that we really pay attention to students as learners and their interests and really sort of follow their lead is in kindergarten and doctoral programs. Everything else in between is really about shoveling information their way. And so I think one of the things that's most powerful about Socratic seminars is that once you detox kids, and remember you said that with your great books story that you had to get better at it, but you also said that your kids had to get better at it, right? And at some point they had to trust that you really did care about what they had to say, and that they weren't performing monkeys for you and trying to guess what your right answer was. As kids get older and older, it takes longer to detox them. That's the best phrase that I've been able to come up with, to really believe that you're interested in what they have to say, as opposed to just sussing out the right answer and can we get on with this so I can graduate and go on to college and do the same thing there. It's one of the reasons that there may be a lot of different reading levels in 4th and 5th grade, but 4th and 5th grade I think are one of are probably the sweet spots for Socratic seminars. Kids have enough maturity, emerging maturity, to have things to say and to have a little bit of life experience, and it's before they're so social that they're worried that they're not going to be cool about what they say, and you can get really fascinating conversations with them. As kids get older, they get more jaded and those sorts of things. And so I think what's most powerful about Socratic seminars and why they work so well for lots of disenfranchised learners, because I've had more success with seminars with disenfranchised, low homework doing students, is that when they realize that they're not jumping through hoops for me, they have lots of things to say, and where it's really the meanings that they have to make. And it's one of the frustrations that teachers have in my workshops, and it's why I'll rarely do a workshop that's shorter than 2 or 3 days, because I really have to have teachers experience the fact that it takes a while to believe that it's about the process and not about some different way to get kids to get to my, as a teacher's, understanding of a particular text or an idea. And so I think that's very different. I think it really is incredibly empowering for students, for K-12 students, who by and large have simply been funnels into whom information is poured and then it's wrung out at the end.
So yeah, and like trying to think, I'm still getting a major echo over here. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I'm right in this, but the way I fit this into your learning framework is that you're looking at learning systems that individuals can be nodes in that system. The system itself learns. The teacher is part of that system. Every student there is a part of that system. And you're getting to understand what dispersed knowledge is within a group, but also getting them to what they call collective intelligence.
Right.
Collective. That wasn't a question. So go on to my next one.
Yeah, no. I think that there's an important insight in there, and that's that seminars, there's a lot of stuff about social learning and about constructivism and stuff. Seminars are sort of the, one of the pure examples of constructivist learning. It's about and social learning, the social construction of meaning. I read this text, I did some sort of literal thing, whether it was a ticket or an activity, a center as a second grader, but I've got a literal understanding of the text. I think what it means in my own head, and then I'm going to come together in this setting where it's going to be very safe for me to test ideas and to play with ideas, and I'm going to go ahead and meanings are going to get made. And I think that's unique in kids' learning experiences, and I think it's unique in the learning systems as they exist in our classrooms.
Well, and I think preparing. I'm still getting major. I changed my I think preparing them for a lot of the network phenomenons of our modern time, things like Wikipedia, where you have to construct something. I want to change format a little bit here, talk about planning, critical planning, and the importance of plans. I like how you're capturing the advantage and very carefully thought out planning for the event, appealing to the farmers and to the episodic quality, to the quick thinking hunters. The ticketing system sounds very much like the application they call questing. You can give the whole class a class of questions, or you can individualize them. And my question is, so hard to have the kids make up their own ticketing process?
I didn't get the question. I was sort of half there with the, but it out.
Yeah, I wonder if I should sign it. But the question was about ticketing, about getting kids to prepare for the actual event. And would you think it's okay for kids to make up their own?
Sure. So the ticket really is an expedient. Believe it or not, I found that I started doing these with 10th and 11th graders. I found that students would lie about whether or not they read the text or not. And one of the things that's unique about a Socratic seminar in terms of pedagogy is that the one thing we know is that everybody has read the text. And so I needed some way to make sure that everybody had read the text. And so the ticket became a way to basically say, here's an assignment, show up with it, and it's an assignment that you can't do without reading the text, but by doing it, you read the text a little bit more carefully. And it's whatever it is, it's not those 3 stupid questions at the end of the chapter reading. It's drawing a map of the events in the story, or it's listing the 5 attributes you had that were most impressive to you in the character or something. And there's a bunch of ideas in my materials for that. But they would show up, and if you had a ticket, you were in the seminar, and if you didn't have a ticket, you were an observer. So it started off as just an expedient, because I had to have some easy way to decide, are you in the seminar or are you out of the seminar? As it's evolved, and I think that you're highlighting, is that a good ticket assignment is a really good way to get kids to do some prior thinking about the text. And that prior thinking is really good. So I might come up with a ticket idea. I might come up with 2 or 3 possible tickets that a kid could do. And when I do that, I think I could give kids a choice of what they wanted to do with a ticket as well. My caveat is that, again, sort of in the high pressure, not enough time life of most secondary teachers, having to sort of spend time figuring out what did you do for your ticket, are you in or are you out, would be a problem. But what it might be is that on Monday you assign the text and you say, come up with a ticket, do your own ticket, or here are a couple of ideas. Tuesday you have kids come together and you put them in small groups and they share what they did for their tickets, and you give them some other literal tasks so that you know that they understand the text. And then you know that everybody who was here on Tuesday has encountered the text, had done their ticket, and then you do the seminar on Wednesday, and the ticket has served a purpose, but you've been able to sort of divide those into two different parts. But I'm always thinking about the reality that there just isn't that much time for teachers to do as much stuff as we'd like to do.
Yeah, no, I was thinking more. We have differentiation coming up in a couple of days. And ticketing seems like it would be a great way to prepare kids to
differentiate
for the talk.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. It's it's a really nice avenue for that. In fact, one of the things that I want to. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was just going to wonder if my mic is working better than Chris's. I was going to ask him.
Yours is mediocre, but it's okay. I got it.
Oh, mine's mediocre too. Okay.
But it's okay. But no, his is bad. Yours is mediocre. It's a dramatic improvement.
All right. Well, continue with your thought, and I'll get ready for the next question.
I'm good.
Okay. The next question we're going to ask is this idea of or a discussion about science and science. These types of questions are appropriate at any age, K through 12, and seem most effective in literature, social studies, history, and other humanities courses. You can look at Wittgenstein, who wrote about language quite a bit, especially later in his career. And he talked about this idea of how language. One concept is that 10 words are like Plato's four triangles are kind of very definable, while others, such as James, lead us to this point that language, how we use it, it's more non-Googleable. That brings us to the question: why do you think, or why are Socratic Circles best applied?
Actually, I think they work great anywhere. I really do. What I've found as sort of a practical thing, and to not set teachers up for, and is my mic working okay?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay. Okay. So, to not set up teachers for a frustrating professional development experience is that in reality, in the life of sort of most high schools, public, international, private, in most high schools, it's easier to find texts in the humanities than it is to find texts in science and math, number one. That's just and it's not that there aren't great science texts, and it's not that if you had a school, and this was our experience, if you had a school where seminars were pretty central to the pedagogy of the school and the values of the school, the kids, essentially, when kids, it's like junior grade books, it's what Chris was saying, when kids get how to have these conversations, your opening you don't have to worry about an opening question necessarily, because kids know the business that they're about, and they'll find things to talk about. And so you could do them in a science classroom. And I have a lot of science teachers and math teachers in my workshops, and a great science Socratic seminar is for a science teacher to do the demonstration lab that a science teacher often does, but to have that that lab demonstration be the text, and then to sit around as a class and say, so what was the most important step that I took in that thing? Or when do you think the reaction really happened? And to have a conversation. In the same way that there are great math texts. I've used texts about fractals, and I've used some tessellations from Escher, and have used some visual proofs and things like that. You can have great conversations. The problem is that kids in math and science classes expect to do that work less readily. And we've almost won the battle of writing in math classes, and it's been a Herculean task to get kids to realize that writing is a meaning-making activity in a math class. But it really is. But it was like, why do I have to write in math? Math is about numbers. Well, math is about making meaning of and with numbers, and writing helps you to communicate and to make that meaning. And over the last couple of decades, we've sort of integrated writing into math. Socratic seminars are just another leap to make into the math and the science classrooms. In humanities classrooms, kids sort of expect to have discussions, so it's a little bit better fit. So that whole caution there is really more of a practical reality than a philosophical statement. Because I agree with you. I think that they belong anywhere, and it's anywhere that sort of meaning making is taking place. Seminars are a wonderful way to do it. And St. John's, which has a 4-year undergraduate based on Socratic seminars, they do everything with seminars. And so it's not that seminars can't do that lifting in those different content areas. It's that kids find it more challenging, teachers find it more challenging, and so I don't want to set teachers up for frustration. They got enough frustrations. But I always have some math and science teachers, and they always find great things to do, and they have some really, some cool successes with it. But I just want to sort of have some truth in advertising. It's rare in professional development.
I'm going to try again, see if I'm at all understandable. If I'm not, maybe Joe can repeat my question, but I want to ask you about, you're on the topic of math, so the idea of modality. And one of the things you prompt in your teacher workshops is that teachers approaching math and social sciences should also use the Socratic Circles. And Socratic Circles are very much modality. I mean, you do use a painting, or you use a poem, which is loaded with metaphorical thinking. But what about during the circle itself? Do you approve of using tools, of using student work, of using other prompts, discussion starters, or is it strictly a dialogue?
Well, first, I think there's two questions in your question. So I'm just jotting myself a note. One of the things I think for a Socratic seminar is that you have to have a text. So we could have a very interesting conversation that felt Socratic in nature about friendship. But if we don't have a text, it's not a Socratic seminar. It's a thoughtful conversation and a thoughtful discussion, but a Socratic seminar, if it's a Socratic seminar, is something that refers back to a text and is grounded in a text that we share. So it might be a reading, a poem, a picture, and you hope that the conversation will revolve around friendship, but you can't guarantee that it will. And so lots of different things lend themselves to Socratic seminars, not just written materials, not just artistic stuff, but as I said, a lab experiment might do it. A ropes course, you do a ropes course, and then you come down at the end and you say, so what was the most challenging thing we did today? Kids are going to have different experiences, so you're going to refer back to the experience of being on the ropes course. So you got to have a something, number one. Number two, and this is really important for me, is that we as good teachers overlay all sorts of good instructional strategies and classroom management strategies on top of Socratic seminars. So it's perfectly appropriate. I sort of joke there are no intergalactic Socratic seminar police are going to swoop in and carry you away if you break the rules. Ask an opening question, and especially if you got a bunch of second language learners, start with a think, pair, share. Talk to a neighbor about your answer or your response to the prompt. Find a piece of text, take 2 or 3 minutes, and then let's come back to then we'll talk in a large group. That's just good pedagogy. It's perfectly appropriate partway through a seminar to say, we all seem to be confused about this. Let's just stop for a second, read this portion that we're hassling over here, and give them a minute to read it, and then say, so somebody start us off. Let's so sort of pulling things back. So I think that overlaying good instructional strategies is part of what we do, even in the context of a Socratic seminar. In the same way that if a couple of kids are screwing around and my dirty looks don't work, I'll walk up during the seminar and walk around, put my hands on their shoulders to prompt them to be quiet, and then walk back to my seat. I mean, that's just what you do when you're a teacher. And you maintain the kid's dignity and all that kind of stuff, but you can't screw around during the seminar, no more than you can screw around during something else. So you want to make sure that we're still good teachers, even in the context of doing a Socratic seminar.
John, how are you on time? Because we can keep going, but I also don't want to take your whole afternoon.
Actually, I got to be done at 2:30. My wife's going off, and we did have a grandchild yesterday. Felix Zion Zola.
A very echoey congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks. My kid's into Z's. His first one, the older brother, is Nico Zephyr Zola, and this is Felix Zion Zola. So we've got a Niz and a Fizz. So anyway, so I'm picking up. We've got the older one here, the 15-month-old here, and my wife's got an appointment that she's got to get to. So, but I would read. I'd redo the, not redo. I would continue doing this at a moment's notice. I love these conversations.
Yeah, there's some other questions that I would love to have answered, but I'll just send them to you on text, and then we'll blog on them later. But one of the really big ones was about the role of feeling. Mick Ty talk about keeping that as a separate thing.
Right.
Well, as keeping the feelings separate from your interpretation. But
right.
We can save that for the next chapter.
And I actually really want to sort of noodle around with the whole use of social media in seminars.
Great. Well, let's talk informally in between, and maybe we can set up another podcast in the future.
Yeah, no, I'd love to do that, and I'll get back to you. Joe, it's great to see you. Chris, it's nice to make your acquaintance. It's very funny.
Before you go,
I was waiting for this. Oh, go ahead.
How do people find out about you? How can they find out about your workshops?
So they can go to johnzola.com, and at johnzola.com there's an introduction. There's a great picture. There's one page that sort of describes Socratic seminar workshops. Then there's another page. I don't know if you've gone there, but it's got sort of my greatest hits of teaching strategies that I encourage you to take a look at. If you don't know, take a look at the recipe. I just updated it. I just put a whole bunch of examples of stuff, but take a look at the recipe. It's a great. There's just a whole bunch of teaching strategies I use in workshops. But and then the last page are some resources that some friends and I have created. But anything you do to sort of get me out there, and I'm always looking to do. I'd love, Joe, you as well. I'd love to, see if you could either in Bogota or Uruguay or someplace get a group of schools together to host me. I'd love to come and do a workshop for teachers. So,
we'd love to see that down here as well. Thank you very much for taking the time, and I think it's an incredible topic. Looking forward to exploring more.
Thanks. I hope my enthusiasm came through. And the small world, Joe, is that I didn't know you were going to be this. And literally, as I was waiting for this to start, I shot an email to Diana telling her, about the new baby, and that I hadn't seen her in a long time. So, the universe works in strange and mysterious ways. But
it does. Well, tell Diana hi, because I'm sure you might contact her before I do.
Okay, I sure will. Take care, you guys, and let's continue the conversation. Thanks a bunch.
Okay. Bye-bye, Joe.
Okay, bye-bye.